you're a student or researcher looking to embed questionnaires or surveys into your research project, in this video I'm going to cover a comprehensive overview of how to embed questionnaires or surveys into your research project. So to get started, what are questionnaires? So questionnaires are a type of data collection which will ask participants or subjects a range of questions to seek out information to find out more about that subject's perspective, get an understanding of their background, and understand the various perspectives that individuals are coming from and how that relates to the data that you're hoping to gain in your project. So when you break these types of questions down, normally I look at it as what you want to know about the subject and how you want to understand their perspective. So in terms of what you want to know about the subject, this is where you think about questions such as demographic questions, finding out about that person's or individual's background, such as their ethnicity, their gender, where they've been to school, if that's relevant, their age, all different elements like that. Those are your demographic questions. They'll give you a broad understanding of that individual's background and therefore inform you of what that individual's perspective might be in relation to the questions, and gives you the opportunity to effectively compare and contrast within subject groups. Now, in terms of how you want to understand their perspective, these are more your open questions. This is more, whereas your demographic questions can be quantitative in nature, depending on how you ask them, and some questions subsequent to them can also be quantitative. The qualitative questions asking about how they interpret different things, and these are very much in relation to what you want to know in terms of in relation to your project. So if you're asking an individual, for example, their perspective of reintroducing apex predators back to an environment, you might ask that as a closed question initially. Are they in favour? Are they unsure? Or are they against? That's your quantitative side, which is more easy for you to measure in a numeric way. Whereas your qualitative side would be, now give your reasons or justifications for your answers, and that will give you their perspective. And those type of questions that you're trying to understand why that individual might be coming from, do those individuals who respond with that type of questioning technique or response effectively have the same answer as other individuals from their social group or stakeholder group? Or do you need to come at it from a different approach because only some of those stakeholders are presenting with those different perspectives or views? Now, in terms of your step-by-step design, when you're designing your questionnaire, this is where you need to think about, you don't want to necessarily lead the subject that you're interviewing or working with down a particular route if you're trying to get a general overview. If you want to get a specific understanding of their particular points of view or perspectives on the particular area, you might start to lead them down a particular narrative, such as whether you're trying to, if you again using the apex predator example, you might build up to a more larger or significant answer at the end that you're looking for, such as if your objective is to see if you're wanting to introduce, say, wolves or bears back into the environment, you might get the individual's perspective first of what their views or oppositions to your particular thread of research is going to be. But bear in mind that if you lead them down that direction, you are closing certain elements of discussion off, and it doesn't give you as broad an overview of, say, if your questions were looking at conservation and effective management of a particular area of land or county of land or even national park. Those type of areas, that if you close down that discussion by leading them down a particular narrative, you won't get that breadth of discussion. And that's why you need to keep going back to your research questions to draw the types of questions that you need to effectively introduce to your participants and subjects. So for my particular example, in my project, I'm looking at my questionnaire is effectively just giving me a broad overview of the research subjects that I'm working with. So I just want demographic information, a bit of information about their module choices, and a broader understanding of why, how they've received career coaching or professional advice in the past and how that might therefore shape their influence of careers in their degree or in their program. So that's where I'm coming at it from. So my questions are generally very demographic in nature and are largely down the route of quantifiable information. I've got very few open questions. That's purely because I'm just getting that background information and it's forming an early part of my project, which will then lead into interviews, which will explore the more qualitative side of my research. Now, those types of setups might be useful to you, or the survey might be the main part of your data collection. That's entirely dependent on what your research project is looking like, the amount of time you have available. If you're a PhD student or a postdoc or other researcher, you might have more time. If you're a master's or BSc student, you're not going to have the same time as other individuals to participate in that type of research. So those type of elements you need to think about when structuring your surveys. So in terms of writing your surveys, the main takeaways, and these are just some points to structure your questions very neatly. Try to be clear and concise in your answers. Don't use overly technical jargon. It will switch people off, and therefore they might not understand what you're actually asking them. Try and make it as simple as it is possible for that audience. Likert scale, this is again looking at strongly in favour, strongly against a particular point of view, and how that might therefore shape the individual's attitude to your particular project or answer. So whether they like a particular item that you put in front of them in terms of market research project, or you might be asking them about whether they agree with reintroduction of certain species into an environment, whether they want to see particular property changes, such as whether they want things like air source heat pumps or want to get rid of let's say wood burners in a particular household setting. Those type of arguments are something that you may want to include in your study if you're looking at, say, rural initiatives. When you're looking at open-ended questions, these are a bit easier to put together in terms of you're asking for that individual's feedback and opinion on that particular question. You're trying to understand what their perspective is of that particular given answer, or what their view is of that particular argument. So it's asking them to present their view, their thoughts, their arguments for or against that particular question. Text or graphic questions, so these might be where you're looking at embedding something and asking an individual to respond based on the image or the text that's in front of them and giving their view or perspective. This is normally a combination question, so it might be you've incorporated elements such as you may include an advert and ask them to review the advert. You may ask them do they have brand recognition of a particular type of logo, and therefore you're using that as your text or graphic question. So it's a combination of, could be Likert, could be open questions, as well as a text or graphic option. Multiple choice options, you often see these on answers to medical questionnaires or surveys, where they ask for a range of different conditions that you might have, or they may have, if you're donating blood, which countries that you've travelled to. These type of questions are designed just to capture a broad overview of a range of different potential answers or topic areas that you might want to find out about from that subject's history and so on. It's similar, but not this. You can have similarities in this with other types of questions, but these are normally just tick boxes where you're asking for that individual's response of whether they've done this, whether they've been to this, whether they recognize this brand, whether they agree. It's not asking them to agree or disagree. It's normally asking them just to give you that general perspective of, give you that core information. So it's not particularly looking for anything. It's just giving a mass overview. Matrix table questions. These are more where you're it's a ranking type of question where you're asking individuals to show their preferences for different options using a matrix box. So you have columns and rows. The columns will normally be your strongly agree, disagree, options similar to a Likert scale, and then your rows down the side will be your products, your brands, your options that you want to see them rank, and then effectively they will fill in this option as in a matrix format. You can do other types of ranked questions, but matrix table is just one example. Slider questions, very similar to Likert scales, but is just a formatting difference. So if a slider question might be asking, are they satisfied, are they dissatisfied, and getting that general perspective of the individual's opinion. So slider questions commonly seen in asking them their opinion or their thoughts on, say, pain threshold would be one example that you would typically come across. Other slider questions might be just general satisfaction. Did you enjoy your stay at this hotel? Did you? What is your? It might be more specific. What is your opinion of the roads in the Scottish Highlands? What is your overview if you were doing a governmental survey? Form field questions. These are just, again, a formatting one. It's giving them, normally it's open areas such as asking for contact information, asking for medication that the individuals might have, but you're just making sure the box has enough scope that they can fill in all that information. Rank order questions, similar to your matrix option, but generally less rows and columns, more box where they give that option a numeric value. So that might be, say, how much you're in favour of a particular thing. But the options are all within one particular area. So if you're asking, rank your preference for transport in central London, you would give, for example, walking, taxi, tube, car, bike, bus. Those would be the types of options that you're looking for, or both, even for argument's sake. Timing questions. Timing questions are a bit of a niche area, but this might be asking the subject how long they've spent on a given topic. So a timing question might be something such as asking individuals to go into 2 different lectures and seeing how long they feel like the lecture went on for, or watching an advert, things like that. Those types of information might be common in timing questions. Heat map questions, I've not used them, but I've participated in a few where they're on there. Heat map question is something that you might use if you're exploring, say, bird migration patterns or nesting behaviours. So you might use citizen scientists to help you in this area, and you might ask them to indicate in a particular reserve where they've seen particular distributions of different bird species. You might then combine this with, say, multiple choice questions where you may explore, for example, if you were looking at multiple choice, you might look at a range of different birds that they might have seen and then ask them to indicate where the birds have been distributed from their list. That can be more complicated, but it may be more useful and save you as a scientist valuable time in actually plotting and identifying these particular distributions. And some bird watchers might be more available to than you to go and effectively observe the bird's behaviour, whereas you can spend more time analysing it. But that's just one example of what can happen. Meta-info questions, these type of questions are background questions, which the subject often won't see. This collects things such as their IP address, what device they've used, and why they've used that particular system in the first place. This is not necessarily something that the subject will see, but it's something that may be useful for you in your study. Drill down questions or follow-up questions, these are the type of studies that you might use or type of questions you would use in your study if you're looking to find more information about a particular topic and follow up with that individual. Normally it might be an open question, might be particularly looking at a particular niche area or asking them a further series of questions based on their responses to the first survey. Those are always options that you can explore. Now, in terms of tips for formatting and visual design, these are more so just making sure that your survey is clear, it's concise, it's straightforward for the individual to read and interpret. The technical language and jargon isn't overly present unless it's absolutely essential. Colours and fonts that you've used are easy to read, such as Times New Roman, Arial, Calibri, Tahoma. Use fonts that are very easy to read, but make sure they're also professional. You don't want to use fonts like Comic Sans and so on, which might not look as professional coming across to the subject. If you're doing particular market research and you have brand font, use that so that they can identify you if you want to be identified with your product, or if it's blind testing, avoid that. In terms of pre-testing your sample groups, the main thing to bear in mind with a pre-test is if you're doing this on a closed group, which might be family, friends, or colleagues that aren't in the sample group, this might just be to give you an overview of how they understand the questions, how they interpret the questions, and giving you an overview of how accessible your questionnaire is. However, if you're working with a pilot study, this will give you an indication of how they understand the questions, what type of data is being presented when they respond, and pre-testing can give you a valuable resource in terms of accessing that subject knowledge that you will be getting from actual participants. And in the pilot study, it can still be useful to use that very early insight. So, for example, in the pilot study that I conducted, I looked at module identification and found that the module identification was largely, the respondents were very unsure of how to interpret that question, so therefore I removed that from further testing, and have effectively reapproached my study when referring to participants and trying to engage them about their module knowledge or module intent. So in terms of survey tools that you can use as a researcher, I use Qualtrics a lot, and Qualtrics is very, very powerful as a system. It has a range of all the question types that I've covered today in this video. It can be a bit costly if you're trying to do it privately, but most institutions will have access to this in some way, shape or form via their own licensing. And it's also ethically very easy for that institution to therefore ensure that the user data or subject data is not going to be vulnerable to outside influence, and therefore makes ethical approval very easy to get with Qualtrics, whereas some systems such as SurveyMonkey are very good for market research but are not very suitable for academic research, and those are the types of formatting and testing that you need to go through, and not just formatting and testing but even explanation in terms of the ethics of your project. Now, in terms of if you want more information around this area, I have done an article on Substack which you can go and find. I will put the link in the description, and effectively you can go and explore my pros, cons of different software tools if you want to explore that. So do follow the link in the description, and I post a regular amount of academic and career related content to help support early researchers. Equally, if you're looking for making sure that your questionnaire is easy and accessible to other students and or to researchers or to various subjects that you're using, just make sure that you're effectively breaking down what your questionnaire components are. Make sure that you're only collecting the essential information that you need and it's clear and concise. So again, go back to the rules at the start. Try to avoid overly technical language. Try to make sure that you don't lead your subjects with a bias in terms of using leading questions. Don't ask double-barreled questions, so that's where you're asking 2 points in one question. Try to make sure that you do carry out some form of pre-test, even if it's an evaluation by friends and family, and also make sure that you aren't making assumptions based on the respondents. Now, this particular area, when you do your data analysis, try to ensure that when you're doing this, that you can drill down into this data without necessarily going into the individual specific response, because you may have some form of unconscious bias which will preclude your analysis and interpretation of their surveys. The last point that I want to touch on is to do with open access data research. So if you're using open access resources, you'll probably use them on your bachelor's degree, master's, or even on your PhD. Open access files or journals are effectively open entirely to individuals and researchers who want to effectively access them, they aren't behind a paywall. Now, this can generally ensure that you are able to see the methods in more detail, that you can see more of the questionnaire styles they've used and compare your own work to theirs. And the main thing that you've got to be conscious of in this is, if you can't see the questionnaires they've used in prior studies, you don't necessarily know how they've questioned their subjects, and that can affect your perspective of how to effectively adapt their surveying technique, or bringing in your own technique in to a completely different method, using a different methodology and trying to cover the same area. It doesn't allow you to do the same type of testing. Thing I would bear in mind though with open access is certainly something I would encourage. I'm personally planning to make sure my research is open access in its entirety. I'll go through a video specifically on what open access is and the pros and cons of that for researchers. But in terms of making sure that your data is accessible, is such an easy thing that you can do to effectively allow other researchers to be able to see your experiences and your knowledge in your particular field. And this Friday, to apply questionnaires to other articles, one of the videos that I'm going to be putting out is effectively going to look at ecosystem engineers and how you might go about applying a questionnaire to assessing how stakeholders such as the general public might use or might view the reintroduction of, say, of an ecosystem engineer such as beavers into a particular environment, and how that would therefore give you either a broader indication, such as giving you that understanding of how the subjects might therefore view introduction of other species, or what their views are generally in terms of reintroducing a species, so showing you how to apply questionnaires to stakeholders. Okay, thank you very much, folks. And again, as with everything, research is an endeavour that should help you explore the more knowledge in a given topic. So best of luck with your own endeavours and your own projects.